that Diana, Princess of Wales, has in fact.
There are moments in history that refuse to stay buried. No matter how much time passes, no matter how carefully the doors are sealed, some stories find a way back to the surface. The story of Princess Diana is one of those moments. She was not just a royal figure. She was not just a face on a magazine cover or a name read aloud in a church. She was a feeling, a movement, a woman who made an entire planet stop and grieve when she was taken far too soon on that August night in Paris in 1997. And for 27 long years, the world has tried to make peace with her absence. But peace, it turns out, has not been so easy to find. Because 27 years after her burial, something happened at Althorpe Estate in Northamptonshire that nobody expected. Something that has sent quiet tremors through royal halls, through family circles, and through the hearts of millions of people who still carry Diana with them every single day. They opened her tomb, and what they found inside changed everything. To understand why this moment matters so deeply, you have to go back to the beginning. You have to go back to the woman herself. Diana Frances Spencer was born on July 1st, 1961, at Park House in Sandringham, Norfolk. She grew up in a world of privilege, yes, but also a world of emotional complexity. Her parents' marriage was not a happy one. Her mother, Frances, left the family when Diana was just 6 years old, and the wound that left never fully healed. From a very young age, Diana learned what it felt like to be abandoned, to be on the outside of warmth that should have been unconditional. And perhaps that early pain is precisely what gave her the extraordinary ability to connect with people who were suffering. She recognized hurt because she had lived it. When she married Prince Charles on July 29, 1981, the world watched in complete wonder. It was described as a fairy tale. Nearly 750 million people tuned in globally to watch the young, shy 19-year-old girl walk down the aisle of St. Paul's Cathedral in that legendary dress, with its 25-foot train sweeping the floor behind her. She looked like a dream. But behind the veil and the flowers and the carefully orchestrated ceremony, things were already complicated. Charles's long history with Camilla Parker Bowles was not a secret to those inside royal circles. Diana had walked into a situation far more emotionally entangled than the public could have imagined. And she would spend the better part of the next decade navigating a marriage that left her feeling isolated, unseen, and profoundly alone inside one of the most visible families on earth. What Diana did with that loneliness is what separates her from nearly every royal who came before her. Rather than retreating behind palace walls, she turned outward. She knelt beside AIDS patients at a time when the world was terrified to touch them. She walked through active minefields in Angola to draw attention to the devastating consequences of landmines on innocent civilian populations. She held the hands of the dying. She sat on hospital floors with sick children and made them feel, if only for a few minutes, that they were the most important people in the world. She did not perform compassion. She embodied it. And the public responded in a way that surprised even the royal institution itself. They did not just admire Diana. They loved her, completely and unconditionally. Her divorce from Prince Charles was finalized in August 1996, just 1 year before her death. She had given up her HRH title, but refused to disappear. She continued her humanitarian work. She continued speaking. She continued living. And in the summer of 1997, she appeared to be entering a new chapter entirely. She was seen in the Mediterranean with Dodi Fayed. There were reports of happiness, of lightness, of a woman finally beginning to feel free. And then, in the early hours of August 31st, 1997, inside the Pont d'Alma tunnel in Paris, that freedom was cut violently short. The world's reaction to her death was something history had never quite seen before. Flowers were piled so high outside Kensington Palace that you could smell them from blocks away. People wept openly in the streets of London, of New York, of Sydney, of Johannesburg. Millions stood in silence. Her funeral on September 6, 1997, was watched by an estimated 2.5 billion people around the world, making it one of the most witnessed events in human history. Her brother, Earl Charles Spencer, delivered a eulogy that cracked open the emotional reserve of an entire planet. And then she was gone, laid to rest on a small, peaceful island surrounded by a lake on the grounds of Althorpe, the Spencer family estate, accessible only by a small footbridge. Quiet, serene, private, protected. For 27 years, that island remained undisturbed. So why now? Why, after nearly 3 decades of careful silence, was the decision made to access Diana's burial site? The answer, on the surface, is practical. Althorpe Estate is centuries old, and the island where Diana rests sits within a decorative lake. Over time, water can be deeply damaging to underground structures. Moisture seeps through stone. Foundations shift. Burial chambers, regardless of how carefully they are constructed, are not immune to the slow persistence of nature. In the years following Diana's burial, the Spencer family had quietly commissioned several surveys of the estate's grounds, paying particular attention to the island's structural integrity. Engineers flagged concerns. Not urgent, not catastrophic, but significant enough that action was required. The burial chamber needed to be assessed properly, and that meant it needed to be opened. There is also a legal dimension to this. British law governing private burial sites is layered and precise. After significant periods of time, certain legal obligations regarding the preservation and documentation of burial grounds come into effect. A site as historically significant as Diana's resting place carries with it considerable legal responsibility. The Spencer family, as the custodians of Althorpe, would have been fully aware of these obligations. The 27-year mark brought both structural and legal pressures to a head simultaneously. But there was a third reason, perhaps the most human of all. William and Harry, Diana's sons, are no longer the children they were when they walked behind their mother's coffin through the streets of London. William is now the Prince of Wales, a man on the threshold of kingship, carrying the full weight of an institution on his shoulders. Harry has carved out a very different life for himself in California, far from the palaces and protocols that defined his childhood. Despite their different paths, both men reportedly wanted assurance that their mother's resting place was safe, that the lake had not encroached, that time had been gentle, that she was at peace in the way they had always hoped she would be. The decision was made. A small, trusted team was assembled. Engineers, preservation specialists, and members of the immediate family. Security was extraordinary. The press was given no advance notice. In the quiet of an early morning, before the sun had fully risen over the Northamptonshire countryside, the team made their way to the island at Althorpe, and they opened the tomb of Diana, Princess of Wales, for the first time since she was laid to rest in September 1997. What happened in those first moments of opening is something that those present will likely never fully be able to put into words. There is a particular silence that exists in sacred spaces, and the burial chamber of a woman so deeply mourned by so many carries a weight that no amount of professional preparation can adequately ready you for. The team worked slowly, methodically, and with tremendous care. Every step was documented. Every movement was photographed and recorded for the historical archive. Hours passed before the burial chamber itself was fully accessible. The chamber, remarkably, was in better condition than the most cautious projections had anticipated. The fears about significant water damage proved to be considerably less severe than feared. Diana's casket remained intact. The sealed environment had preserved the interior of the chamber in a way that gave those present a quiet and unexpected sense of relief. The structural concerns, while real, were manageable. The engineering team confirmed that remedial work could be carried out without causing harm to the site. But it was not the engineering report that defined that morning. During the careful documentation of the burial chamber, the team noticed something unexpected. There were items present that did not appear on the official records from Diana's funeral in 1997. Objects that had not been publicly noted, not listed in any inventory, not acknowledged by the funeral house or the palace. These were items that someone had ensured would be placed with Diana, quietly, deliberately, without fanfare. Items that had waited 27 years to be found. When Diana was buried, several items were placed with her that had been publicly acknowledged at the time. Photographs of her sons. A rosary that had been a personal gift from Mother Teresa, who had passed away just days before Diana herself, on September 5, 1997. A prayer book. A collection of personal mementos that painted the portrait of a mother, a woman of faith, and a human being who had loved deeply and been deeply loved in return. These were known. These were recorded. What the team found in addition to these items was not recorded anywhere. Diana had made private arrangements before her death for additional items to be placed with her. The people she had entrusted with this task had carried out her wishes in silence, and they had kept that silence for 27 years. Among the discoveries were sealed envelopes, letters, written by Diana's own hand, addressed to specific individuals, and sealed with the clear intention that they would be found not immediately, but eventually. When the tomb was one day opened, when the time was right, Diana had thought about the long arc of her legacy and had prepared accordingly. There was a letter addressed to Prince William. There was a letter addressed to Prince Harry. There was a letter for her brother, Earl Spencer. And sources indicate there may have been additional letters addressed to individuals whose identities have not been disclosed, people who were important to Diana in ways the public may not have fully understood. The existence of these letters, sealed and waiting beneath the earth for nearly 3 decades, suggests something deeply significant about Diana's state of mind in the final weeks and months of her life. She was preparing, not in a way driven purely by fear, but in a way driven by love and intention. She was a woman who understood that she might not have as much time as she deserved, and she was determined that the people she loved would still hear her voice, even when she could no longer speak. The letter to William, according to sources familiar with its contents, focused on his future and the weight of the crown he will one day wear. Diana wrote about the kind of king she hoped he would become. Not the ceremonial kind, not the distant and untouchable kind, but the kind of leader who remembers that beneath every title and every tradition, there are human beings. She wrote about her own experiences within the royal family with a tone that was not bitter, but honest. She had witnessed things, endured things, and she wanted her son to understand her story not as a cautionary tale of victimhood, but as a map of the emotional and institutional terrain he would inevitably have to navigate. She wrote about love, about marriage, about the importance of choosing a partner not for convenience or for strategy, but for genuine connection. She had learned that lesson the hard way, and she did not want her son to learn it the same way. The letter to Harry was different in tone. Those who have knowledge of its contents describe it as deeply personal, emotionally raw, and filled with the particular tenderness that Diana always reserved for her younger son. She understood Harry. She saw in him a sensitivity that the royal world would struggle to contain, a restlessness that institutions are not designed to accommodate. She encouraged him to be true to himself. She wrote about the importance of remembering who he was before the titles and the protocols, before the cameras and the expectations. She wanted him to use whatever platform life gave him to serve people who genuinely needed it, not as performance, not as obligation, but as a genuine expression of who he was. Whether Harry's decisions over the past decade, his departure from senior royal duties, his move to California, his public advocacy, and his pursuit of a more private and self-directed life, were shaped in any direct way by his mother's letter is something only Harry himself can know. But the parallels are striking. Diana saw her son clearly, and she wrote to him accordingly. Beyond the letters, the burial chamber also contained documents. Not casual notes, but carefully preserved papers that Diana had chosen to protect in the one place she knew would not be easily disturbed. The full contents of these documents remain known only to the Spencer family at this time, but sources indicate they relate to Diana's years inside the royal institution. Records she kept, observations she made, accounts of events that were either misrepresented publicly or never acknowledged at all. This is not entirely surprising to those who have studied Diana closely. She was not a passive participant in her own life. Her 1995 Panorama